Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the BIA weekly COVID-19 update webinar. This week, we're focusing on the impacts on the charity sector and clinical research. And we have a fantastic range of guests, which I'll introduce in a second. But first of all, Steve Bates, our Chief Executive. Morning, Steve.
Morning, Michael. Morning, everyone.
Yeah, so just to run through who we're joined by today. So first of all, we've got Stephen Simpson, who's Director of Research at our Charity of the Year versus Arthritis. Morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Secondly, we've got Sine Littlewood, who's Director of the Clinical Research Network at the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR. Morning, Sine.
Good morning, everybody.
And finally, Burnand, the Chief Executive of the Association of Medical Research Charities. Good morning, Aisling.
Morning, Michael. Morning, everybody.
Fantastic. So that's our lineup. But as usual, this week, we're going to start with a quick roundup of what's been going on in the news and developments in COVID-19 over the course of the last 7 days. Last Thursday, since we had a webinar, a lot happened as ever. Steve, you had a very busy weekend, which we'll run through in a second.
Yeah.
Go questions and answers with our three guests. And as we're going through, as ever, I will look to pick up questions that you, the audience, can fire in on the questions box on the GoToWebinar panel. So if you have any comments or questions as we're going through, please do fire them in, or anything you want to understand or hear about, or a point you want to make right at the start. I'll be watching those as we go through and picking up anything that you want to pick out or put to our guests. We've also got a polling question at the end of your section, Steve, so get ready for that. Okay, with no further ado, I think we'll jump into the update of the week. So, Steve, I'm going to turn to you first to go through the latest developments. So here's a busy slide, just kind of reflecting the level of activity that's taking place, industry working with government as part of a kind of a task force approach over the last week. And I think we've seen, I'm sure you'd agree, and you said it on your blog on Tuesday, we've seen a really big increase in the level of contribution across a number of fronts. Do you want to talk us through how you see this has kind of panned out over the last few days?
Yeah, so I think within the UK, we now understand that increasing testing capacity is a core part of thinking, both for managing the process of COVID-19 at the moment, and also probably as part of an exit strategy. And I suppose last week we saw the response from the industry, which was fantastic, to the government's calls to step up, and you can see that both in things like Thermo Fisher Scientific talking about the big labs, the mega labs that they're supporting, and backboning. We've seen much clearer guidance from the government in terms of how industry can help the government increase coronavirus testing capability and capacity, and actual specific guidance from them on the tests and testing kits that they are interested in getting in the new website, which I hope people have found useful. We asked for a detailed plan. I think we've got a detailed plan, and I know that's enabled many people to be able to participate and engage with it. And also, I hope give you some sense of the priority areas. Obviously, antigen testing, very, very important, and how you can help there, the particular things that they're interested in buying, and also I think through that an understanding of what is being deprioritized or can't be managed in the first couple of weeks. One of the things that's kept me busy this week is on the right-hand side here. We set up with BIVDA and the government and the Royal Colleges a new crowdsourcing platform, which is around some of the knotty challenges in the lab for viral detection and PCR kits, and that's really taken light this week. Lots of people have engaged in that. Thank you very much for the over 500 contributors who've been engaged in that. There's really techie lab challenges there, but will lead to some really good outcomes, and I think improved practice to increase capability. And I think also we've seen, if you think about it, on antibody tests, things have probably taken a step back. It's a knottier scientific challenge than perhaps people had thought in terms of getting to a very accurate test. And we've got a number of companies and institutions coming together to form consortia to support that. All of this, of course, on our biacovid19.org website in terms of the links, but the government one in the middle there is the latest one, and I think has been revamped very rapidly in the last week.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. So I mean, some fantastic comments on that crowdsourcing platform. I mean, a lot of the science went beyond me, but I mean, I was really impressed with the level of detail and the strength of the ideas and the level of engagement on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of people doing sort of Zoom pub quizzes, I think it's the most technical pub quiz over Easter I've ever been involved in. But it does show that there's real power out there and people who are able to help, and it's great to see the public and private sector coming together on some of those knotty challenges. Yeah,
absolutely. And looking beyond that, I mean, there's been plenty of news going on outside of our direct effort as well. So, I mean, we just pulled out, didn't we, Steve?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's interesting to see, if you look at it, the WHO, the World Health Organization, have asked Andrew Whitty, well known in our sector, former GSK CEO, to help with the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. So obviously a prominent UK voice there. Obviously used to work with Patrick Vallance when in their time at GSK. Avacta Group and Cytiva, many of us will know as the new name for GE Healthcare Life Sciences, are working on a collaboration for point of care rapid COVID-19 test. UK Biobank, obviously one of the big strengths in our ecosystem is the ability to look at genotype and genetic data. They're now adding COVID-19 data to that, so that will be a very rich data set for research purposes. And those of you who are following CEPI, the international organisation, they've organised and launched their new material with regard to this, and that's open as of next week. So if you're following that for vaccines, that's an important one to remember.
Yeah, the CEPI calls us one for, as I understand it, one for trial sponsored CROs, and then another one for manufacturing capability, isn't there?
Yeah. So I think if you've got if you're a CRO or you've got capability to do trials, then that may be one worth having a look at.
Okay, good stuff. And then repurposing drugs is very much part of the agenda as well, isn't it? I mean, this is an interesting chart that BioCentury published, which just shows, I mean, I suppose the scale of the number of trials and assessments underway. I mean, the numbers there are astonishing, really, aren't they? I mean, a lot of antibiotics at the top line there, presuming that's what infectious relates to, but a really great spread.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see that the global industry has really stepped up to this and looking really across the board at anything that may be able to work against COVID-19. This is one of the reasons why we're unable to track this on a sort of individual basis. There's so much going on. Obviously, many of these runners and riders are unlikely to make it all the way through to a full license in this, but I think it shows the vibrancy of work, and of course we hope that repurposed agents may be amongst the speedier things that could show a difference. I think the key thing we're also seeing is the need to do this in trials of size and scale that can make a meaningful statistical contribution so that people can actually assess this, and I think there's been some moves to do that as well, and we've put the one in here that people may have seen about the AstraZeneca trial, which is one of the leading ones that we've seen come out this week.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. So in a second, we're going to go to colleagues from the kind of the clinical research and charity perspective, Steve. But I just thought you might want to touch here up front on where you think the government's got to in terms of the support package. I mean, there's certainly been some questions raised over the last week or two about the effectiveness about the loan scheme, haven't they? So there's data out showing, what was it, only 1 in 5 businesses had actually got the loans. Although the new data from UK Finance, I think in the last 24 hours, suggested the numbers had gone up a bit. But our perspective is that this isn't quite right for our sector in any event.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, banks very rarely lend to biotech companies at the best of times. So now we're at the worst of times, it's unlikely that they're going to change the behaviours of many years. So I think what members have been telling us and being clear with us is that the structure of the things that have been announced so far for businesses aren't really hitting the spot for them. They seem to not be hitting the spot for many companies in the economy. And we've been part of making a particular argument around the needs of our sector and engaged with the Treasury on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting campaign sort of group starting up to Save Our Startups, which is sort of focused on the same issue, I suppose, that we've been calling for, which is that early stage kind of pre-revenue segment, calling for pretty much the same things I think that you've been saying over the last 2 or 3 weeks, actually. been interesting to see that. Okay, and then turning more specifically to the kind of the impact on the charity sector and clinical research. I mean, we're going to go into this in a lot of detail with our guests today, Steve, but I just thought you might want to say something up front about the impact. I mean, we've pulled out a couple of news stories here. Certainly CR UK said, you know, it had a big impact on them. What's your feeling generally before we kind of turn to our guests about this?
I mean, as you know, we've always operated on the basis that the UK ecosystem is an ecosystem, and in which we're particularly lucky to have many world-leading medical research charities engaged, and therefore things that have an impact in terms of global clinical trials being slowed. We've seen the impact in the NHS of the refocusing rightly towards COVID-19 for other types of work. This means that it's not just small companies, but it's also the work that's supported by charities. And in a sense, as colleagues will talk to, charities themselves depend on income from the public. And if the public can't shop or are stuck at home, then also we've seen consequential impacts on their business models or their charity models. So I think for us, we're in this together with guests that will be able to talk to this more eloquently than I can, and that's why I thought it was important that we came alongside, and in a sense, a problem shared, I hope, is a problem halved, and I think this is one that we share with our charity colleagues.
Okay, good stuff. Well, just before we get into that, I thought we could do a quick poll. I mean, clearly there'll be a mix of organisations on this webinar, Steve, from academia, businesses, perhaps some charities as well. So here's a quick question to sort of to tee up the discussion with our guests. I mean, notwithstanding where you might sit within the sector, the question is thinking about the needs of the life science sector during the COVID-19 situation. Do you think that the UK government support package described to date is likely to be fairly effective, very ineffective, or we're not clear at this stage? So I'm just going to launch this now, Steve. Just give me 1 second. And we'll see what.
And I think we're taking a broad swathe of life science sector. So if you're a charity, think about this as being the stuff that's been announced for charities. If you're a company, think about it, the stuff that's been announced for companies. It's impressionistic rather than scientific, this one, but it's always useful for us to get a sense as to where people are, because if you have had a good experience, then it would be great to know that, and we'd also welcome comments on the chat if you've been able to access one of the loans, or you found the announcements around the charity stuff very or fairly effective. I have to say I've not found many thus far, but it may be just the poll of people that I'm talking to. So
okay, about 2/3 yeah. So it's just for people's information. I know people often ask these questions, but 150 people on the call today, Steve. So not a bad base size for a vote of this nature. 2/3 of people have voted, so I'm just going to close it now. I think 3, 2, 1. Pick something. Good. We're up to 70%. Let's just have a look at the results of that. There you go.
Well, I'm glad that there's 1% who found it effective, and good that there's 15% fairly effective. But it looks like most people are in the still not sure yet or fairly ineffective bucket, and hopefully that helps frame the discussion as we go into the next part of the webinar. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, good stuff, Steve. So thanks for the intro, very useful as ever. What I'm going to do is probably come back to you after each of our guests has had a bit of a chat with me, just for a bit of comment. But first of all, then I'm going to turn to Stephen Simpson, Director of Research versus Arthritis. Oh, as if by magic, you've turned your camera on, Stephen. Thanks very much. So for those of you who don't know, the BIA, the Bioindustry Association, partners with a charity each year. And this year, Versus Arthritis is our charity partner of the year. So I'm delighted to welcome you today, Stephen, to talk about Versus and I suppose the impact that COVID's having on you and what you're seeing out there in your world. But I wonder whether we could just start by, maybe you want to give the audience a quick overview, just sort of 30 seconds on who Versus are and the work that you do.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And can I welcome the comments that Steve made about the environment? I think today's discussion is really welcome about the fact that this is a collaboration and we're in it together, and the equal recognition needed for all those contributing So Versus Arthritis may be a new name for many people on the call, but it is a charity forged from two pre-existing charities, Arthritis Research UK and Arthritis Care. And our organisation is focused on the needs and well-being of people with arthritis and all forms of musculoskeletal condition. And we do this through recognition, improving the recognition for arthritis, which we feel is understood and recognised in both the research community, but in society at large. And to directly help and support people with arthritis, an area of activity that we're growing, and the legacy of research that we've funded over the last many years as Arthritis Research UK that we continue. So we continue to push on both basic research as well as health and clinical research. So we're an organisation that covers the wide range of charitable activities to support people with arthritis.
Yeah, good stuff. So, I mean, it was a fantastic partnership already between the BIA and Versus this year. I was at the BIA Gala dinner where we had a guest speaker from Versus. It was an incredibly powerful contribution. Clearly, the work that you do is hugely valuable, but is likely to, well, I mean, you can tell me, it is likely to have been significantly affected by the COVID outbreak. So, you know, both in terms of kind of the community that you work with and the research environment, what sort of impacts have you observed so far over the last couple of months?
Well, I think understandably, like every organisation across the sector, we're noticing severe impacts, significant impacts on the organisation, but also on the lives of people with arthritis that we serve. And I think of it in terms of three buckets. I think of how we're affected as an organisation, our people, our volunteers, our supporters, those that work with us, the people we serve, people with arthritis who are in very large part across the nation. We have 17 people with different forms of musculoskeletal condition, many of whom live in pain and isolation already, and we can understand the impact that that coronavirus has had on them, both in terms of their direct health and the anxiety this causes for their direct health. Many of them are isolating and shielding, the lack of access to information, lack of access to healthcare, and also their normal healthcare has been interrupted. So understandably, a very large number of people feel very isolated and separated from society at large, and it's magnified, as it will be for many people with long-term conditions. So that's our second group, and of course the impact on our research and researchers is very significant also, and we have a large investment in research, 130 million pounds of research, almost all of which is stood down, whether that's clinical studies and trials or basic and health related research. And of course, we're trying to understand and mitigate the impact of that as we work through this problem.
Yeah, so you think the vast majority or all of that research has been stood down? Did I hear you right there?
Yes, I mean, but for many people, many of our researchers are deployed. Many of them are clinicians or healthcare professionals deployed to the front line, understandably. And with the situation in universities, almost all labs are closed, other than those being prioritized for COVID testing and other related research. So we've got to understand the impact that will have, because restarting that research is going to come at a cost. It's not simply a case of starting where you left off, especially as we will know from clinical studies and clinical trials. You don't just pick up where you left off. Recruitment has been severely impacted. But even for basic research studies in the lab, where you've had to stand down the research, picking that up again, we're going to have to really understand the impact for researchers and how, not just the financial cost, but the cost to innovative science. And that's something we're going to work through. And we don't have all the answers for that. But yes, almost all of our research will have been stood down.
Yeah, we'll be interested to see what Ashley's got to say about that in terms of the wider sector. I'm pretty sure that's a picture that will be mirrored across many such organisations. But I mean, that sounds like a very challenging environment. So what have you as an organisation been able to do so far? And what do you think you've not been able to do, or what challenges are there?
It's really interesting at the moment. I think, like many organisations, we're innovating and adapting, whether that's us as an organisation. We're lucky we were well set up to start to work online, as other organisations have been, but lots of organisations have been in different places. So our teams, our colleagues have all been able to work. So that's a good thing. That's organisationally, but we've still got a way to go to make sure we continue to support our colleagues and those that volunteer for us. The real challenge is supporting those people with arthritis. And what we've seen is adaptation and innovation in a variety of settings, we were able to move our helpline so that everyone could do that online. So almost seamlessly, we could do that. And that's been really important because we've seen a doubling in the last 2 weeks alone of calls to our helpline. So people with those anxieties, understandably fearful for their situation, we've been able to do that. We've innovated online, so our online community has transformatively increased in thousands, and that's been really important. People are using different ways of coming to us. We've developed a new virtual assistant online called Cova, which is a version of our existing online assistant, and we've been working with other charities as well. This is a chatbot, and it's able to give people, so it can augment what we can offer in our helpline services online. So we've seen lots of innovation and adaptation across in order to improve our services for people with arthritis. And obviously our policy teams and our branches and communities have all been working differently. What's really astonished me is how quickly an organization of our scale can adapt, especially when we're all working from home and we're covered across the 4 nations, and everyone's innovating and adapting differently. And we're continuing to learn. It's not, we don't have all the answers as yet. For research, of course, the real impact, as we've said, we've paused all of our research calls, all of our new funded research. So I've spoken already about the fact our existing portfolio of grants is already impacted, but our new calls, and we've done that to ensure that right now is not the time to have call deadlines. We've pushed all of those out to the summer to give the community a chance to readjust. I think the real challenge for us will be to understand how we, as I said earlier, work with our research community to understand the impact on our grants in the longer term. So we've been adapting in many different ways, and I think that's really, a testament. And I think it's really interesting to compare notes across the charity sector, where we're seeing not just mitigation and trying to, ensure that we mitigate against the impact of coronavirus, but also start to look to ways and means of working that can support the effort, but also support those most vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the longer term. I mean, where do you see this going? I don't know what sort of timescale you want to put on it. I mean, clearly as an organisation, you'd be perhaps looking, months, even into the years ahead. Do you see a lasting impact? I mean, what could be the longer term implications for Versus and maybe the broader sector?
Well, I think there are a number of things here. I think, like a lot of fundraising organisations that depend on voluntary giving, we've got to think and adapt. And I think, as Aisling may speak to this, everyone's in a slightly different boat. So when we think about the charity sector, even large charities, we just heard about Cancer Research UK, are not moving forward unimpacted despite their size. So it depends on your operating model, how you work as an organisation, if you have the benefit of reserves. So sustaining this initial wave of the next 6 to 12 months will be the first phase. There will inevitably be a longer term impact. How we operate in support of people with arthritis is one thing. How we operate in support of the research community, that's the more difficult question to answer. I think we all agree we're going to see some significant impacts on the research ecosystem, and it's going to be vital that the charities and the charity funded part of that sector is part of the solution. But it's going to be a challenge for all of us to see what the longer term impacts will be on research. I think we know that they will be there. One of the discussions at the moment is what you do to protect your current research, and how much new research and what type of new research you should be funding. Will this change? Already we can see it's changing our immediate plans for calls and new grant calls that we were planning for the coming year. We're having to think about which of those will be most relevant. So it's not a very good answer to your question, Michael, but it's difficult. That the sector is to project forward. It's going to be a long haul, and we're all going to have to adapt. And I think the journey will be different for the charity sector anyway. Aisling, I think, will probably agree, will be different for different charities. So many of them in different sort of experiences at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe we should come back and have another chat about this in a month or two's time, see where we stand then. I mean, clearly, we're only a couple of months in. It is perhaps quite justifiable to say it's too early to tell. Steve, I'm going to bring you back in a second. I just want to quickly give a plug out to the questions box. Do please ask questions as we're going. I'd be really interested to hear what you as an audience think about what you've heard from Stephen, how that compares to your experiences as an organisation, and where you think this is going. And yeah, so do please fire your questions in and we'll try and pick them up as you go along. Steve, coming back in, what's your response? What's your thoughts on what Stephen's saying there in terms of the impact?
Yeah, Stephen, I'm sorry to hear. I'm not surprised, but it can be very difficult for established research in the NHS. I think we are seeing that reflects the experience that I'm picking up from companies that have got research going on in the NHS, which is not COVID related, and I think that we share a common challenge there. I'm delighted that we're seeing the innovation in digital health that organisations like yours are delivering to people who use your services, and I think that is one of the positive legacies that we may see on the other side of this period, with lots more people accessing many things in a new way. And I think that will really be an interesting and a vibrant part of going forward. I suppose the trick is, how do we make sure that we've got strong organisations ready to do both the research and the support going forward. And it feels like we're very much on the same journey as Charities as we are with many smaller biotech companies. I suppose many of the BIA members may have things that are in different health systems as well, maybe participants in global trials, or have bits of their work going on in America or in Asia, and obviously they're differentially impacted as opposed to the NHS.
Okay, good stuff. Just a couple of comments coming here. Tina Crombie says, great to see the online support working, Stephen. So that's, I think she's referring there to, the way that you've managed to kind of transition to a more virtual model of support. Cross-charity effort could perhaps include ensuring means of protecting and supporting people who can't use or access online resources. So she's talking about sort of an 80-20 rule there. So, I mean, that must have been something you've considered as a charity. Is it, what about people who can't access a chatbot or whatever?
I think this is a really important question, and I think this is a more difficult place to innovate. This is a situation that exists before COVID. We do have more vulnerable groups. Those are less able to access the technologically driven help that we can provide. It's much more difficult at the moment to be able to do that, because being able to physically reach them. All of our face-to-face services have had to be paused, so we can't get around that. So we're going to have to continue to think about that. I don't have immediate answers as yet, but it's something the charity continues to think about, how we can support that minority group who are not using the online services. Hopefully they're still able to access helpline, but of course that's advertised through our online services. So it is a challenge. I do accept that, and I think it's an important point that's been raised.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I think some fascinating insights there. It's been great to hear how this is working at the front lines team. So thanks for that. I'm going to turn to our next guest now, who is I'm going to go up one. Sorry, there we go. To Sheena Littlewood, who, as if by magic, has turned on her webcam. Sheena. Who works at the Clinical Research Network at the NIHR. So your work means that you have quite a lot of interaction with medical research charities, but you're kind of that link between the sector and the research decision-making kind of process in government. Perhaps that's a really inelegant way of describing what it is you do, but why don't you have a go with telling people how the Clinical Research Network works?
Sure, thanks, Mike. The Clinical Research Network is just one of the elements of the infrastructure that the NIHR provides to support research in the UK. And most of our work is about supporting research that companies and organisations in BIA will fund, but also research charities. Then we are a funder ourselves as the NIHR. So essentially, as long as it fits the criteria that the Department of Health and Social Care has set for us, then we will provide the support in the NHS and increasingly social care settings. So not just hospitals, might be GP practice, might be a community clinic, to enable that study to be set up and to deliver the recruitment into those studies. So that is essentially what we're there to do. But as I say, we're part of that wider NIHR infrastructure and work very closely. And I lead a group across the NIHR of people who coordinate that way of working with charities, and we can provide more information. There's quite a lot of information on our website as to how we do that.
Okay, good stuff. So, I mean, in terms of NIHR's response overall, I mean, we know that research is a key pillar of the government strategy in terms of dealing with COVID. NIHR, I mean, we saw very quickly at the start of this sort of a quick response in terms of, you know, providing new guidance and changing your approach. Can you just give us an outline to the audience of what changes were made and what those were designed to achieve when you put them in place a few weeks back?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as a government funded organisation, and we had a very clear remit to prioritise the funding and support for research through the rapid response system that you've mentioned. So that was about setting up a single national process to prioritise studies for the support that we have. And basically the ones that would hold the most potential to tackle COVID-19, whether that's prevention or treatment for people, or ultimately finding a vaccine for the disease. And doing that on behalf of the Chief Medical Officer for England. But we're working across the UK, so the system we've set up includes colleagues from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland governments, and also clinically as clinical experts as well. And essentially for Clinical Research Network, or CRN, apologies for the acronym, but that's by having that status of approval from CMO, it meant that we were then prioritising those studies for our rapid response. We have a rapid response system for any urgent public health issue, but that meant that we could focus on those in particular. The system that we set up with the online portal, we do a triage. We'll accept anything through that as NIHR, which is funded or unfunded, and then we triage them to the most appropriate supports. That might be a medtech and in vitro diagnostics co-ops, or a rapid response funding group to make sure that people get the funding that they need. And that group isn't just NIHR, includes MRC, UKRI, etc. We've talked already about pausing studies, so we've had certainly we would be pausing anything as a funder, as an NIHR, to make sure that as Stephen said, the staff that are involved in helping support delivery are clinicians and healthcare professionals, and so they are needed on the front line, but trying to get that balance right between making sure that we support the front line, but also we have sufficient staff available to support the COVID-19 studies as we go through. So it's quite a tricky balance on the front line, and then obviously making sure that we've got the information for patients and public through our Be Part of Research website as well. So sorry.
Yeah. You talked yesterday when we were chatting about this concept of badging, didn't you, from CMO?
Yeah.
So this is about the prioritisation, isn't it? So what sort of studies have been given the green light? Have you got any kind of details, or can you give us a sense of what has been prioritised?
Yeah, I mean the details of once they've had the badging and have had the approval are put up on our website. So again, after this, can make sure we share with you where those are. So to date, we've as of this morning, we've got 27 that have been approved. So they're quite a mixture. There's 3 of them are preclinical. The majority, 16, are interventional, and the rest are observational settings, and that's in hospital and community settings. 7 of them have commercial sponsorship. 2 are MRC, there's 5 UKR, NIHR and 3 NIHR only. 1 EU Commission, 1 from the NIHA in the US. So there's a variety of sponsorship, and we've got quite a few adaptive platforms, and those are open to commercial companies as well. So we're trying to encourage them, if you've got something that would fit one of the adaptive platforms already got, rather than you have to set up your own system, if it's feasible, if it makes sense, and if the company is agreeable, then that's an option for people as well. But in terms of what things are people looking at, well, as you'd imagine, there's some vaccines. I think there's one vaccine quite early phase, one about how to rapidly develop the manufacturing processes for vaccines, lots about repurposing drugs, as Steve's already highlighted, and antivirals. There's also some stuff about reassessing systems and processes we've already got. So how can we use flu community assessment tools? How can we look at our ventilation protocols? We've got evaluations of interventions in cytokine release, one on genetics of susceptibility and mortality in critical care, serum testing in children, and observational studies in particular categories. You know, how does it affect children? How does it affect pregnant women? How does it affect, you know, people who are over a certain age level? So it's quite a mix, which is good. And what we're wanting is to tackle lots of different things, and we've got a lot more in the pipeline. So we've got a team that meets 3 times a week to look at this assessment once they've been triaged. Quite a number are unfunded, so they're going through to the funding groups or elsewhere for support and advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, there's a question here from Jane Kinghorn on that point.
Yeah.
So understand the online portal has a number of studies awaiting evaluation, with timelines for response elongating, she says. How are NIHR addressing that? So a risk of a backlog there potentially?
We looked at this because once we publicised, I think we were getting anywhere between 25 and 45 submissions a day, which was, so it was the graphs of it looked very like the graphs of, you know, peak infections and peak deaths. So we recognised that very quickly, and what we did was put that triage system in pros. An awful lot of them, something like 75%, were unfunded. So those have then been pushed on to the funding group who are picking those up, and then as I say, a number were not at a stage. The ones that really need to go to the urgent public health group are the ones that have got a protocol, or at least a reasonable synopsis, and those are the ones that will go forward for badging. The rest need to be filtered out and are then passed on to, say, to MICS or through to the BRCs, or also as respiratory translational research collaboration is another way of getting advice and support. So the things that are coming through a very huge range from literally an idea to I've got a protocol, I'm ready to go, and the vast majority of them are not at the stage where they're ready to go. So we hope that things are speeding up more quickly. We know that once something has approval, we could set things up very quickly and get onto it. So there were people working all over the bank holiday, for example, sending stuff out on Good Friday, getting responses back by Easter Monday, then talking to the company on the Tuesday, Wednesday. So we're doing our best to try and get that as swift as possible. If you're not getting anywhere, then please let us know you think something's got stuck. Then do let us know. There's an email address on the website where we can pick that up and triage those if you've got queries.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Well, I mean, that's my kind of final point to you, Gina, really is, you know, what's your advice on the best way to get new proposals and ideas on NIHR or MHRA's radar? You know, is that the route through to get to this? Is it just basically get into that portal? What's the process look like in practical terms?
Yeah, so yes, is the answer is to have a look at the portal and put your application in. And as I say, if it's not immediately ready, obviously if it's got a protocol or synopsis, then that will be, you know, that can be expedited really quickly. And again, if it hasn't got funding as yet, then we can triage that to the rapid response funding group and help them with that. If it's at an earlier stage of development, then depending on what's needed, we can fund that through to other government portals, or as I say, our medtech and innovation in vitro diagnostic co-ops. If it's at a preclinical stage or needing funding or a clinical champion, then our respiratory translational research collaboration is looking at those sorts of ideas and see what they can do to help people. And they're working not just in the respiratory, but working with the other collaborations, the biomedical research centres and the UK clinical research facilities as well. We can signpost to other areas, like if it needs ethical approvals or other types of approvals, and I can provide you for sharing all the different email addresses. Our NOCRI team is a key sort of portal and key area of support of signposting for where to get the early support. So again, I can share their email address and how to contact them if people are interested in that.
Okay, good stuff. Right, Steve, I'm going to come to you now. I mean, clearly NIHR kind of a sort of a significant part in the response to all of this? I mean, what's your reaction to Sheena's overview of how they've adapted to the situation and are prioritising things?
Well, I think we've seen NIHR do an admirable pivot into COVID-19, and that obviously has plus sides for some and downsides for others. So obviously, if this has meant that your activity, to use the trendy term, has been furlonged, then that can prove a challenge, and we've talked a little bit about that. But I think what this actually means in COVID-19 is that the UK, because it is a UK effort now, really does have a first-rate research infrastructure for many of the scientific challenges that we're seeing coming through COVID-19, and some really interesting things which we've talked about as innovations in the BIA. So adaptive trial design, obviously the Oxford one, Recover, being central to this, and that I think will be central to the global effort in terms of thinking about things there. We obviously saw the Sine trial get up and running very fast from a BIA perspective as a small biotech company in the UK, and that's built on an infrastructure of expert networks that have been established over a period of time. So people have looked in testing at perhaps the underinvestment in an infrastructure for a period of time. If you look at the research infrastructure, I think the UK has been very strong in this, and being able to pivot that into some of the questions around antibody response, some of the questions that are emerging around, as you say, how COVID affects different groups and different people. And what this means is that all of this work that's going in now will come out very fast at us, I think, and there'll be lots coming through. So for anybody who's doing COVID-19 work, I think the UK is a really rich place to do it, and that's what I'll be talking about on the global webinar I'm doing later, some of the strengths of the UK as a clinical research infrastructure. I think for charities, it depends where you lie in this, and of course, with COVID-19 being a very newly discovered disease, it's not like there's a COVID-19 charity who are saying, yeah, it's all going in our direction. What it means is really it's an impact on all of the other communities and other researchers who are working together, and I think we need to balance the two, and that's difficult in these times, and really the challenge that we're sharing here.
Yeah. No, I agree, and you know, we have had to, as a CRM, we've had to pause. Well, we haven't. It's either been the sponsor, or more often it's a local decision about how they balance the demands of clinical care, and then trying to still keep going some COVID-19. It's not that all research has stopped. Again, people have shown innovation in terms of, you know, can we do follow-ups online? Can we use other ways of not bringing people into the hospital? Can we do the test if they're coming in for their maternity check, their cancer treatment or whatever? And obviously, you know, it's the safety of patients who are already enrolled in trials, or where it would, you know, be life-threatening, like you might lose your sight, but you could, if you take part in this trial, you could be okay. Then obviously we're wanting to keep those things going, because we're an ethical and moral responsibility to those people who are already on treatment regimes. So there's quite a lot of balancing going on there. But you know, we recognise it as a responsibility. Like Stephen said, you know, we're all wanting to be prepared for restart, but we don't know when that's going to be, or what that's going to look like, or what that will require. So we're very keen to work with everybody else to understand that too.
Okay,
I must say that the MHRA have got praise from many members of the BIA for their pragmatism and their flexibility in what's a difficult time for everybody. And I think, you know, being able to keep trials going as best they can, particularly in the ones you talked about, has been a real boon for many BIA members.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. We're going to have to move on. Sheena, thank you very much. Incredibly interesting to hear your perspective from the other side of the fence, as it were. I'm going to turn now to Aisling, who many of you will know, I'm sure, Chief Executive of the Association of Medical Research Charities. 140 members or something like that, isn't it, Aisling? And a huge programme of work in research going on across your membership. So it's fantastic to have you on the webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we've seen over the last couple of weeks and heard a lot about the pressures that this crisis has created for the charity sector, big impacts on operations, and of course financial implications too. So what, in terms of what you've seen and heard from across your membership, can you just give a sense of where, you know, you think things stand as we talk today?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. Thank you, Michael. I just think it's really helpful to set some context. About £1.9 billion of funding went into medical research from AMRC members in 2019. And so we are absolutely an essential part of the research ecosystem that Steve and others have talked about. And we fund more research than NIHR and the MRC, so a kind of very significant contribution. And the economic impact of COVID and the collapse in the charity funding pose a real threat to the viability of charity-funded research, both now and in the future. With cancelled events, charity shops closing, and the economic downturn really impacting donors and, of course, perhaps endowments. We've kind of polled our members, and 3/4 of AMRC members anticipate a reduction of about 25% or more on their fundraising income, with over 1/3 of charities expecting a reduction of about 40% or more. And so we've kind of done back of the envelope sort of calculation and sort of triaged with other things, but we estimate this is going to result in at least 350 million shortfall in UK charity research spending. That's not including Wellcome, they're in a slightly different place, fortunately. And of course, then what else is happening? Well, furloughing a significant number of staff as we speak. You'll begin to see that come out on social media. Parkinson's announced earlier this week they've furloughed 100 members. Action on Hearing, I think about 70, JDRF, etc., etc. So many are furloughing significant. That'll be about 1/3, sometimes up to 2/3. And also we're hearing of the very small charities. Some are essentially mothballing. I mean, they've just shut up for the time being. Question about whether they're going to be able to restart at some point in the future. So the loss in fundraising income is going to have a long-term impact on charity research and the UK life science sector, where of course the charities play an essential part in the ecosystem. And these roles are absolutely essential to the UK's ambition to be a global hub for the life sciences. You know, we've played a really important part. I always think it's one of the sort of unique USPs of the UK environment. So that's kind of the first bit. And then the immediate impact, you know, as you've heard from Stephen talking about this, is that the trials that are being stopped or paused or delayed, the majority is about 75 to 100% of the clinical trials and studies in support of research and prioritising staff, as Sheena said, for COVID have happened. We estimate roughly that's about 126,000 patients that are currently unable to participate in paused or delayed charity-funded clinical studies. And over half of our members have reported the vast majority of their current grants in universities are on hold. In terms of the kind of the support package that was announced by the Chancellor probably about a week ago, we don't believe that's going to help any of our members at all, as they do not provide commissioned frontline services, despite, you know, supporting vulnerable people at this particular moment in time through the crisis. And so that's a kind of big issue for us. And I suppose what we were really particularly concerned, which is why we wrote to the Chancellor last Thursday, was that it gives some sort of, the announcement may falsely reassure the public and others that the charity sector as a whole is being financially supported, which is absolutely far from the truth. I mean, obviously some will benefit from it, and it's an excellent first start, but it just really doesn't go far enough and doesn't touch the sides. So there we go in terms of that.
Yeah, so I mean, I know that you and the team at AMRC have been doing a huge amount of work to support your members. I mean, you talked there about kind of lobbying on the support package. Can you give us a sense of what your priorities have been over these last few weeks and where you see your work evolving as we get through it?
Yeah, so I suppose three main ways: providing support, as indeed Steve's done via a live blog with guidance and information, just keeping on top of that, allowing people to share experiences through a kind of Yammer group internally, so people can kind of ask questions, find out what others are doing, etc. Then building up the kind of evidence base to demonstrate the impact of medical research charities and the challenges being faced. So we're currently out surveying all of our CEOs on the furlough situation to get the numbers, which we hopefully will have by the end of the week, for example, so continuing to build that. And then advocating on behalf of all members, you know, to share the evidence with key stakeholders in the life science sector and the research sector. So we've shared our evidence with and our briefing on the impact with government ministers and officials in research and life sciences in order to kind of highlight the number of challenges that there actually are, but also what the sector has actually been doing to support the national effort, which is quite significant in terms of what they've actually been doing. So, kind of that just to give you some sort of inkling of what they've been doing. They very early on were part of the whole shielding process and really trying to support vulnerable communities and keeping safe. And some of them just also, once they were shielded, then ensuring that they were getting the right support that they needed, including food. So, you've had everything from, a coalition of cancer charities to provide, common advice to cancer patients, Diabetes UK, the British Heart Foundation. They've seen massive spikes in the number of calls, as Stephen was saying, to their lines. It's something like 125%, 600% increases, in terms of what they've been doing. Many of them have seen a massive uptick, with I think Diabetes reporting 1.5 million users of their digital platform. Suddenly, if you compare it to the year before, it's it's uncomparable. Others are kind of looking. So Asthma UK and the British Lung Foundation have sort of launched a post-COVID hub and helpline for people with breathing difficulties after COVID-19. So they're thinking ahead to help support their families and their their carers, etc., and also to help researchers and policymakers in that particular area. And so, yeah, those sorts of things are ongoing. And then you've got kind of actually, what else? You've got people like the Wellcome Trust, who put they're doing many things, but a £5 million 10 million pounds to tackle COVID epidemic. LifeArc created a 10 million fund to progress, I think it was repurposed treatments for COVID. Wellcome Trust has allowed their HQ to be used by UCH staff during the current period, which I know has been certainly well received by some of those at the front line. Quick, funded by both Wellcome Cancer Research UK, has been repurposed, as you know, for around the testing side of things. Many of CRUK's laboratories are in the process of being used to help provide support on the testing side. Diabetes UK have launched a call. MS Society has kind of also put out a survey to kind of look at, how to collect data on how the virus is affecting people with MS. So a whole range of ways that the charity contributions are helping support the national effort at this particular moment in time. Whilst I have to say, they are under significant pressure in terms of actually, kind of running out of money and having to kind of, running out of staff that they can't, kind of then redeploy even on a voluntary basis back in to help support them. So, I see this as a kind of a dreadful, perfect storm, one of these awful situations where, on every single side, they are trying to support those that are most vulnerable. That's what they're for, to support their beneficiaries, whilst at the same time trying to figure out how they can keep going.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. I mean, Steve, let's kind of compare notes on here on the route out of this. I mean, Ashton, you talked yesterday when we spoke about, the need to protect these research programs. I mean, clearly there's a short-term impact, but, longer term, that impact is not going to go away. If the money's not there, the research could potentially kind of fall away. So what do the solutions look like in this space? Are we talking about a role for government, the sector more broadly? What's the route out of this?
Well, we've called for, do you want me to just, we've called for a kind of, a viable support package to help, medical research charity sector. So that ecosystem, which I think extends out to others in the research around the medical health side of things. That's what we really believe we need, some sort of bridging to help, kind of over sort of a 6-month, maybe 12-month period until things return to an environment where, charities can get back out and people are donating again. So I think that's, top thing. And we recognise that we'll need to reprioritise some of the research that will need to be restarted. Not all of it's going to be able to restart. There will need to be some triaging in that. So I think that's kind of our take, is really tailored and selective support to try and help restart research. Steve?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the COVID era may demonstrate to the globe is that the UK is actually very strong in life science, clinical research, and the ecosystem that we operate in, and that, as it was before, is likely to be a core plank of any economic recovery strategy. So I think, you know, both the ability to lean into the COVID crisis, as you've amply demonstrated, is happening by the fantastic charity sector in the UK, and I think from some of the UK's companies it will be seen. And secondarily, I think that will then provide a longer term opportunity that the UK is actually a good place to do this, and is innovative, and is set up with the right series of players who can operate in public, private or third sector spaces to move the dial on this. And if you think about this in global terms, the role that Wellcome are playing, I think just shows the centrality of the UK ecosystem to those global discussions. So in the long term, I'm bullish, and I'm confident actually that that this way of working, the fact that we can lean in, the fact that we have got a strategy that we can build on some of the innovation that's happened during this period, whether it be the sort of digital platforms in terms of supporting vulnerable people, or the new ways of doing research, will actually stand us well in the fullness of time. I think at the moment we share your problem, which is that despite wanting to help, the mechanisms by which the Treasury are operating don't seem yet to be reaching those on the ground, and that also poses a challenge to some of our companies. So that feels like the immediate thing to get right, because we need to be here to be able to stand up the other side, and I think we share a common challenge there, and keen to work together on that one. Longer term, I think you know, having some common themes about how we get out from this, what works, what's working well, how people can collaborate in new ways will be important, and keen to continue to work with you on that. Okay, good stuff. I'm going to move us on. We're about out of time, Steve. So just quickly, thank you, Aisling. Incredibly useful contribution and comments on the situation. Steve, let's just run through the the tail end of this now, which is just really about giving people a sense of additional opportunities to engage, isn't it? So let me just flick through the last remaining slides in the next 30 seconds. So details of all of the contact points for the things that you've mentioned in terms of government channels are up on our micro site. I don't think we need to run through those in any level of detail. The thing that you might want to mention, Steve, is the three engagement opportunities at the bottom here. So you mentioned the webinar this afternoon on the antibody testing program, and then there's this WuXi online forum you've got a keynote on at 5 o'clock today. Links to those on our website, I think, on the events page. Yeah, so maybe if I can do, I'll talk to this. So we're trying to keep a regular drumbeat of BIA webinars, and we'll do another one next Thursday in the morning, 11 o'clock. This afternoon, there's the next government webinar about testing under the testing strategy program. I'll host that one. We've got John Bell coming on, and he'll talk about antibody testing and where we've got to and what the next steps are on that. So hopefully that will be a useful one. And then I'm joining a global discussion with Chinese and US colleagues again this afternoon. If you're interested in the more global picture, that would probably be useful for you. And mark your card for a COVID-19 virtual partnering event happening first week of May. That's also on our website. Okay, good stuff. And then there's just a link there to a virtual partnering event, which free virtual partnering event, which we're collaborating with colleagues on. Again, links to all of these on our website. Just time for maybe one or two questions at the end, Steve. Just squeeze them in. I know people are dropping off because they've got appointments at the top of the hour. But on that point about China, does BIA collaborate with China on research in relation to COVID-19, considering they had it first and they know about the challenges and the lessons learned? What about that, Steve? So I'd point people to the webinar on our website, which we did, it feels like a couple of weeks ago, probably only a week or so ago, with AstraZeneca from China and our partners from China about the experience there. And we do partner with colleagues. We've built a relationship through the BioCentury conferences through WuXi, and another one this afternoon to get a sense of global priorities with WuXi. We'll continue to do that. Okay, good stuff. Final question here. Will the slides for these webinars be shared? All of our webinars get uploaded to our YouTube channel where you can view them and see all the slides again. But do email me or the events team at the links on that slide that you've got there, biaevents@bioindustry.org, and we can send stuff out if you want it in particular. Okay, Steve, given we're against the top of the hour now, maybe we'll leave it there. I just want to say a big thank you
to Stephen, Ashlyn and Sheena for joining us today. Brilliant contributions. It's been fantastically interesting to hear about the challenges across the research and charity sectors. And thanks to you, Steve, and see you on the next 2 webinars this afternoon, right?
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.